Real quick before I forget, time is running out on my plushie campaign. If you would like to get one of these guys yourself, please check out the link in the description. Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne, and today I'm going to be continuing my series by the book, where I look at how movie adaptations change book characters and then draw them exactly as they were originally described. And today we're doing an episode on Uglies. In the mid-2000s, Uglies was a very popular YA dystopian novel, and I was a big fan. The general concept was about a girl named Tally Youngblood discovering that the beauty-based society she lived in was hiding secrets about the mandatory beautification operation everyone receives when they turn 16. She grapples with the superficial thoughts and feelings of self-hatred that her society brainwashed into her, and learns how to value herself and others in a different way. I reread the whole book and highlighted every time a character is described. We're going to draw the characters based only on that, starting with Tally. Our first description of Tally is on page 9, where it says, "She put her fingers up to her face, felt the wide nose and thin lips, the too high forehead, and tangled mass of frizzy hair." So right off the bat, we have some pretty good description of her face. We often hear her describing herself in kind of despair, especially in these early parts of the book, where it's clear that everything about her appearance makes her uncomfortable, and she's really just counting down the days until she can be, like, quote-unquote fixed. On page 16, she says, "Not into her squinty, narrow-set, indifferently brown eyes." So we do know that her eyes are kind of a basic brown color, and that they're apparently squinty and too close together. These are things that she complains about a lot, and she's always very surprised when anyone compliments her eyes. It's the biggest insecurity for her, them being too close together and squinty. In fact, the squintiness is even such an issue that she's called Squint by the fellow Uglies in Uglietown. So this is really her most major insecurity. We hear her talk about her skin blemishes on page 91, where it says, "Her thin lips pursed with unhappiness. Her hair grew even frizzier because she kept running her hands through it in frustration. A trio of zits exploded across her forehead, as if marking the days since her 16th birthday. Her watery, too small eyes glared back at her, full of anger." So Tally is definitely really unhappy with her appearance. One of the things that really surprised me, we'll get into the direct comparisons of her appearance in the book versus in the movie, but one of the things I did generally just notice, even from the marketing materials, is that it seems like the movie is too afraid to actually cast unconventional looking actors, or actors who aren't up to Hollywood standards. I admit that Joey King, she has a bit of an unusual nose, I suppose, compared to some actresses, but overall I don't think she is way outside of the norm of the beauty standard, and certainly her eyes are very big and round, and her lips are not super thin. You also never see her with any skin blemishes, at least in her 15 to 16-year-old range. So it seems like they didn't want to really commit to that. I would also say her hair is not a tangled mess or overly frizzy. And I suppose if the pretties were more aggressively different than a regular person, if they looked like complete Barbie dolls or like Alita Battle Angel levels of souped up beauty, maybe this would be okay. But I do feel like it kind of felt like a cop-out, especially since it's pretty clear that Uglies is kind of satirizing and discussing the way that Hollywood and the beauty industry and models affect the self-esteem of particularly adolescent girls and boys. So it does seem kind of lame that, for example, David is cast as this actor and Shay is cast as this actress. These are not the people I would have picked if my story was about unconventional or just normal schlubby looking regular people versus Hollywood. They look very Hollywood to me, and I think it's weird to cast them. As for Tally's body type and shape, we don't have a ton of information. We do know that she often talks about characters being skinny, whether it's characters who have gone through the pretty procedure, or her friend Shay, who she describes as actually too skinny and expects that she'll need to be filled out during her operation. So I'm guessing that Tally herself is on the heavier side of the skinny pretty operation. So I drew her just a little bit bulkier, a little bit heavier. She's also described as looking fast or, being strong. So in general, I just thought like giving her a little more mass would be probably pretty accurate. We don't get a ton of description on their clothing, which was something I was always very annoyed about. There were a few things that gave me some indication of what she may be wearing. One of the things that I thought was really interesting is this discussion of how disposable everything was in the city. Almost everything that she wears or uses from the city comes out of the wall. It's like 3D printed or something. So everything has a very like cheap, thin, disposable quality, according to Tally. She talks about on page 169, city things were disposable and replaceable, as interchangeable as the t-shirt, jacket, and skirt combinations of the dorm uniforms. So I know that's one thing she could possibly wear. I also see that when she goes to the smoke, she gets a sweater. It says on page 162, she couldn't believe that the sweater, brown with bands of pale red and green highlights, cost half as much as the sleeping bag, which was threadbare and patched. So I'm going to draw her in this sweater. In general, my focus is making sure that her insecurities are represented on her. Okay, so let's directly compare the way that Tally looks and is styled in the movie versus the Tally from our book description. Tally's body type, first of all, she does look quite thin, and it seems very close to the body type of a character that she calls Skin and Bones and refers to as skinny. I also think that in general, like, she should have been allowed to have less perfect skin. I do think they were probably covering things up that would have made her look more accurate to the character. Her hair also, even when she's like almost burning alive or, in situations where her hair should be quite messed up, it's never that frizzy. Additionally, this actress has big blue eyes. I don't think her brown eyes are that important, but I do think that her being called Squint in this movie is absolutely ridiculous. Her eyes are quite large and round. In general, I just don't think they went hard enough. And I also notice that she looks a lot like she's styled like Katniss in a lot of shots. And the Hunger Gamesification of Uglies is going to come up a lot when we discuss the movie versus the book. So we'll get into more of that later. But appearance-wise, in general, I don't think it was the worst casting choice, but I think there were styling things they could have done to actually bring this actress closer. Next up, let's talk about my favorite character, Shay. She's first described on page 24, where it says, her name was Shay. She had long dark hair and pigtails, and her eyes were too wide apart. Her lips were full enough, but she was even skinnier than a new pretty. Shay is an important character. She ends up being kind of the best friend of our main character, Tally, and she is, very importantly, the first character to really talk to Tally about the potential of the idea that maybe they don't need the operation. She's the first character in the book to really present an idea of like self-acceptance and self-love. She genuinely seems to like the way that she looks, and she doesn't respond the way that a lot of the other uglies do when she is sort of like teased or bothered about her looks. There's another important thing about Shay, which is her fingernail chewing habit. Her nails are described as ragged multiple times, and that's because she bites her nails. And Tally offhandedly thinks to herself that nail biting is one of those habits that go away after the procedure. This is the first time in the book that we get an indication that maybe something internal is happening as well as external when it comes to the operation. In the book, the operation is supposed to be purely aesthetic. So the idea that you could lose a bad habit is the first bit of foreshadowing that something else is going on, that there might be more to this than just a beautification process. So this is a really important aspect of the book. On page 36, when they're messing around with the morphos, a kind of software that shows them different ways that they can be prettified, we hear her described like this. The high hairdo towered over her thin face like a dunce cap, the white blonde hair utterly incongruous with her olive skin. Her skin color comes up another time in this passage, and it's kind of disturbing. Later down in this page it says, Shay was still too skinny even after the morpho software had pulled her towards the average, and maybe a bit lighter. Tally took the shade of the skin closer to the baseline. So this tells us that there is a skin color baseline, which is really interesting because earlier when Tally is basically talking through the propaganda that she believes about her culture, they kind of imply that racism is over in the society by doing this procedure. It doesn't exist anymore. And Tally can't even imagine that people ever used to have conflict over skin tone. But we see here that there is a baseline level of skin color that is lighter than Shay's color. And so we know that there is some kind of like racist beauty algorithm that is going on with the pretty process, which is really interesting. It doesn't get super dug into in this book, but it's kind of there underlying everything. And a lot of the beauty standards that they talk about, particularly the big eyes and the small nose, are Eurocentric beauty standards. They're very like white beauty standards. So this was something that was very important, I feel like, in the undercurrent of the book. And one of the problems with this idea of just making everybody quote unquote beautiful without really interrogating what that even means. The homogenization of beauty in this culture has some very dark implications if you think about it. A lot is made of Shay's body type. She's referred to as skin and bones and constantly referred to as too skinny to be a new pretty, which is the skinniest level of the pretty operation. There are 3 operations that you undergo. One, you're a new pretty, so that's when you're like 16 to like in your 20s, I believe. Then you get like a middle pretty, which is like in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and then you get like the late pretty beautification process for like elders. We know for a fact actually that Tally has never seen anybody like who's fully wrinkly or like really looks old the way that we perceive it, because she almost like throws up. She's like horrified when in the smoke she actually sees somebody who is aged naturally, and I believe they're only supposed to be like in their 50s. So this is a really funny aspect of the story, but it's also really important to kind of dig into because it really shows how sheltered she has been from normal faces and how that has caused revulsion at things that are very normal. I also drew Shay with her hoverboard. She's the one who kind of teaches Tally how to hoverboard and gives her a lot more freedom of movement. She's such an important character and I like her so much in the book. I wanted to draw Shay after her operation. We see the first indication of what this would look like on page 35, where it says, "The software took over. The eyes gradually grew, reducing the size of the nose between them. Shay's cheekbones moved upward, and her lips became a tiny bit fuller. They were already almost pretty sized. Every blemish disappeared, her skin turning flawlessly smooth. The skull moved subtly under the features, the angle of her forehead tilting back, and her chin becoming more defined, her jaw stronger." In actually drawing this, I got quite an eerie feeling because I felt like I was whitewashing her, and I think that this is an important aspect of the underlying themes of the book that I really don't feel like are experimented or talked about in the movie at all, and I think that that's actually a huge mistake. We're going to talk about that more with the casting of Dr. Cable. But anyway, this is kind of how I'm interpreting it. I wanted it to look quite uncanny and creepy and too far. I think that there is some indication in the books that this is how the prettification process would look, that it would be way beyond what is considered normal beauty in our society now. We especially know this because Tally gets to see some old magazines and she thinks that the celebrities are all uglies. So clearly none of them are what she's used to seeing as far as the pretties go. So I'm thinking that they might be kind of like really extreme facial proportions, something that would be a little creepy. And again, like Alita Battle Angel perhaps, something really extreme and cartoony. She constantly talks about how the pretty's eyes are so big it makes you want to take care of them like they're babies. So that's kind of what I tried to emulate. So talking about Shay in the movie versus the book, appearance-wise, I think that this awful wig that they gave her is so silly. Obviously, it's not accurate to the book. She's supposed to have pigtails, but instead she has this really short wig and it does not look very real to me. There are a lot of areas where everything looks kind of cheap, particularly in the CGI, and a lot of the wigs and contacts. They just do not look good to me. The outfits for the specials look absolutely horrendous. And I do think that Shay as a character has been completely gutted in the narrative to give more of her scenes to Paris and even some to David. I think this is because, again, there is a Hunger Gamesification of Uglies. Uglies has Tally and Shay's friendship being a bigger portion of the overall runtime of the book, I guess. But in the movie, it seems like they want to drum up a like hackneyed love triangle, which doesn't exist in the book. Paris is never implied to have any romantic feelings towards Tally before or after his operation, and vice versa for Tally. She doesn't seem interested in anyone but David, really. I really hate the changes they made to Shay, and I think that her pretty also looks very weird, and the effect is not very good in my opinion, especially when she smiles. It's just not convincing. I think CGI was not the move with this. They should have done something else. I really do think that this story would have been highly effective if it was animated, and it would have been so much easier to tweak the parameters of their faces and do more dramatic things without it looking so fake and strange. Next, let's talk about Dr. Cable. Dr. Cable is the primary antagonist of Uglies, and she is a terrifying character. The first time she's described is on page 80, where it says, "The woman was a cruel pretty. Her nose was aquiline, her teeth sharp, her eyes a non-reflective gray." It also says on page 81 that Tally closed her eyes, taking a rest from the sharp angles of the woman's face. She has a face that is not like what Tally is used to with the pretties. The pretties are supposed to put you at ease, make you want to protect them. They're very docile. Personality-wise, they're like golden retrievers. They're sort of just like dumb and simple and happy. Special circumstances are not like this, and Dr. Cable is a special. Her eyes are described on page 82. It says, "They were almost as big as a normal pretty's, but they angled upwards like a wolf's." She's referred to as looking like a predator and just generally being terrifying. And again, she's supposed to have sharp teeth. This is something that's consistent with a lot of the specials. She's kind of a mad scientist character, and she never really comes across as being friendly or sweet like what Tally is so used to. She's just a fully aggressive female villain, which I totally love. Her face is supposed to inspire fear, and her eyes being dramatically tilted upwards and being a non-reflective gray is one of the things that really stuck out to me about her character design. I always pictured her as like an icy blonde with a very blunt cut. Unfortunately, we don't get any information about her hair color or styling, so it's really left up to you what you picture. But I will be drawing what I've always pictured, and trying to follow the way that her face is described as much as possible. I wasn't actually happy with the close-up of her face that I drew first, so I drew another one in profile so we can see her aquiline nose. That just means that there's like, it's like a Roman nose, which I think is really interesting because it means that they don't have the exact same beauty standards that we do. This is one of the most common things for people to get changed in a nose job, and it is always very sad to me because I think Roman noses are very attractive and cool. So it always bums me out when people lop off that part of their nose and make it a little button nose. I mean, I think button noses are cute too, but again, like from an artistic perspective, like cutting off your Roman nose is just wild to me. Anyway, I do like that she's described as a pretty who has an aquiline nose. It tells you that they're not all like Barbie dolls necessarily, and I think it works really well with specials because they are supposed to have a harsher, more austere kind of beauty, and so I think it matches her well. I have her top sharp teeth showing. It says that only her top teeth show when she smiles, and I made sure that her eyes kind of tilted up very dramatically, so she has that wolfish, very sharp look to her face. I also drew her very pale, and I made her body type kind of like a severe sort of sharp hourglass. Again, again, we know that the specials and the pretties are skinny, but not as thin as Shay. So I did give her kind of a classic hourglass shape, and I just wanted her body to look a little bit off. I made her arms quite long. The specials are supposed to be quite lanky and scary, almost a little like Slender Mini. At least, again, that's my interpretation. So they changed Dr. Cable's personality quite a bit. Again, this follows the Hunger Gamesification of Uglies. She is more like a diplomatic, lying type of character. This is more common with female villains anyway, so it feels kind of lame to me that they changed her from this openly aggressive mad scientist type to more of a like fake motherly, duplicitous character. In the film, she basically is like, Tally, they're gonna blow up the city and kill everybody, so you have to go in there and be a spy for us. Like, again, this kind of undercuts Tally's character as well, because she doesn't actually make a bad or selfish choice. She does something that literally anyone would agree to. I think that the casting of Dr. Cable as Laverne Cox was really weird. For me, part of it is because I think putting a person of color in this very powerful sort of eugenicist role actually takes away from the themes of the movie. I think that it's actually fantastic to add more racial diversity into these movie adaptations. I think that particularly in 2005, everything was very, very white. We talked about this in Percy Jackson as well. So I think that this is a good thing to do, but maybe not with this particular character, because this society actually strips away your uniqueness, and that includes your ethnicity. We see that with Shay. We see this with her lightening of her skin and changing of her features to fit a more Eurocentric beauty standard. This is what she looked like in the manga. She's a little bit older looking in the manga than I would have expected. I know that she's an older character, but just judging by the way that Tally was basically like dry heaving at the sight of an actually wrinkly old person in the smoke, it makes me think that everyone would have that sort of like Botox face, or very, very smooth. So this isn't really what I pictured either. So here's the full lineup of the characters based only on their book descriptions. Let me know what you guys thought of this adaptation, if you've read the book and seen the movie, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much to my members and patrons, including Among Us Skibbity, Kristen Kobitz, Kira Kira, Gold Pikachu, Skitten2, Yume Lily, Jamie C, Data, Misty Raven, Artist James, Loro, Foxglove, Random World, Lily McFarlane, Becca, Casey, Elliot Graham, Anastasia Evsiva, Viet, Graveyard Moss, Grexiest, Olia, Maddie Momo, Brandon Stark, CB, Lucy Amajiki, Liv Liv, Ravens Crow, Salsalat, T Hill Music, Jabber Dabber Doo, Kadaria, Astral Fox Art, The Expressive Poker Face, Subaki, Cutie Pie, Ice Cream Pal, Cola, JJ Jade, and of course, Blah 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 Blah.